A very good morning, everyone. Hi, thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Dhanashri Chandwania and I work as an investment analyst in Grosem. I welcome you all to our next session on venture capital funding process. In this session, we will be covering topics like what is venture capital, how to pitch to venture capitalists, what venture capital look into the startups, and much more. So, to initiate the session, we have Mr. Ajit Johri as our moderator. Ajit works as a corporate development and investment in Bharat Innovation Fund. He has total 15 years of experience. He was the executive in Ernst and Young for 2 years. Next, moving forward to our panelist, we have Mr. Manu Chandra with us. Mr. Manu has been the founder and a managing partner in the company Source.vc. He has total 19 years of experience. He has also served as a director in company 3i Group for around 11 years. Next, we have Mr. Deepak Bhatt with us as our next panelist. Mr. Deepak Bhatt is the vice president in Ankur Capital Fund. He has total 10 plus years of experience. Deepak had past 5 years experience in Unilever as a financial manager also. We also have Manira Panchaya with us as our next panelist. She is the investment manager in the Invent by InTouch Holding. She has total 5 plus years of experience. Also, we have Mandalam with us. He has worked as an assistant manager in BSP Mutual Fund in his past, and now he is being working as an analytics and research lead in World Farm. We welcome you all the panelists. Now, I would like to share the deck with Mr. Ajit Johri.
Hey everyone, good morning and welcome to this panel discussion. Thanks for a great introduction, and I'm so happy to share this panel with many of my ecosystem colleagues here. Through the panel discussion today, we'll try to get some good insights into what goes around an investor's head, inside an investor's head when they're really looking at evaluating startups. Predominantly a couple of parameters, and we have a power pack panel here who can give insights from various domains and various aspects in terms of the spectrum that they belong to. So let me sort of kickstart the conversation with probably the first parameters that typically VCs look at, and which is usually when we evaluate a startup, one of the parameters, and probably the most governing parameter at that stage, is the team or the founders that we evaluate. And within the founders, a specific combination of skill sets, relevance to industry, etc., at a broad level. But I'd like to open the questions for. Let's start with Manu. Manu, in the past, when you've looked at startups and especially the early stage focus that you go in with, what are typically the broad parameters you look at, and some of the interesting let's say insights that you've drawn and corrected that lens a little bit as well, because it's super early. It is maybe the product market fit is a little bit defined, but they have to really scale themselves up, and that's the major focus that you sort of bet on as an early stage investor. So if you could throw some light on that as well.
Yeah, Arjit, thank you so much, firstly, for having me, and good morning to everyone else on the panel. Funnily enough, at the stage that we entered, there is no, there's no sight of product market fit. There's no sight of even revenues, because for us, I think out of 12 deals that we've done, 11 have been pre-revenue. So it's a very large weightage, and if I would oversimplify this issue, I would say 70%, 70 to 80% of our weightage really goes towards the team. And the team means a lot of things, right? The team means the individuals in it, but also a view on how well they gel together in terms of either a working history together or a complementarity of skill sets that they bring to the table. That's important to judge. And as a venture capitalist, what we like to do is we try and spend as much time as we can in person with them to understand them and their behavior. And their behavior is an indicator of how they're going to be sort of in running their business. So we look at a few things. We certainly look at relevant experience in the sector. We look at obviously the chemistry and the background of the team and the history together. We also like to look at how well they're able to articulate their vision. This is important because as early stage investors, we need to get these founders to be able to do two very important things. One is to be able to attract team, and your ability to communicate your vision clearly to us should also be, an indicator whether they'll be able to communicate it well enough to exciting talent, right? The second thing is they need to get follow-on funding, right? We're all seed funds, at least mine is a seed fund, so it's important that they're able to, attract investors as well in the future. And for that, the ability to communicate vision, what they want to build, what's the scale of ambition, all of that is extremely important. So that's something that we like to do. In fact, for us, we do very few deals as a fund and we work very closely with these founders. It's also an indication of what's the quality of engagement going to be like, right? So it's obviously a very important parameter for us. As I would imagine it is for all the panelists here, but I hope that gives you a sense of how we look at things.
Thanks, Manu. That's insightful. I think you did talk about a couple of early signs that you look at for future abilities to execute and scale the business. So thanks for that. Deepak, coming to you, you look at a very interesting sector, and some of the solutions that you've invested in and you evaluate are, let's say, in a sector that is tough to crack, or new innovations completely. How does that lens differ for you when you evaluate these companies?
So I think Manu touched upon something very, very important, right? Like Manu, we also invest early stage. So it's a lot that is dependent on the team, the founders, right? Their vision, their ability to understand what they are trying to solve. They don't have to have answers for everything, but it's about their ability to understand and articulate that there are 100 things to be solving and how possibly they can go about solving these, right? Just before maybe getting on to a specific of as a fund, how we look at some of these things, but personally, I think I just want to pull out two things from what Manu mentioned, right? I think complementary skill set and their ability to articulate their vision. I think as a founder, as a fund, having invested in about 22 companies so far across sectors, we have seen a lot of type of founders, maybe we can put it, right? And what we believe in some of our most successful companies are the fact that complementary skill sets of founders is super, super essential. Because as a founder, they are trying to be solving 1,000 problem, not just their product problem, but 1,000 other problem, right? Be it hiring a product, tech, being licensing, go to market, or whatever may be, right? Having complementary skill sets as a founder group, maybe 2 founders or 3 founders, whatever it may be, really, in our experience, we have seen that really works, right? So that is one thing. As a fund, we also appreciate when we evaluate investments, if we see that there are complementary skill set between founders, that we really appreciate. The other being, as a fund, when we look at investments across sectors, basically we look at investments which can possibly have a product or a tech innovation, right, across sectors. It's not that we have answers for everything. It's not that we know exactly what the entrepreneur is going to be doing, right? This is where our comfort on what entrepreneur tells us, the way he is able to articulate that vision, helps us in understanding whether this is a problem or this is a market that there is out there really will be able to be solved by these entrepreneurs, right? So these two are really, really critical from a team sense, from a people perspective when we look at a founder, and we really spend, like Manu mentioned, I think all the funds spend a significant amount of effort. In fact, I think maybe it's good to also clarify in this audience the fact that a lot of startups think that VC funds like just keep having conversations, they take a lot of time, etc. But the fact is that is essential for a fund to understand and appreciate before they make an investment, because the investment is not we buy today and sell tomorrow. We stick together with the company for like 5 years, 7 years. Funds like Manu's funds, I mean, they spend hardcore time with the portfolio companies, right? I mean, so there is a lot that gets done together with the team as we make an investment. I think the other aspect, particularly as a fund that we look, is the fact there has to be a significant scalability opportunity. Because we believe today, if there is a product or a technology that can solve some problem, which may either be very apparent or may not be even apparent problem, but if that problem has to get solved in a market like India, the product has to be highly scalable, right? So one of the most important thing as a fund when we look at it is how will this be a scalable product? It may be extremely complex, it may be a high IP, it can be anything, but when there is a real product out there, is it something that can be extremely scalable? The other thing, while we work with founders and helping them with their next round of funding, we typically do reasonably decent size of check investment, etc. The other area that we try to get a sense of when we are trying to do this one is what exactly can this mean, right? I mean, a lot of projects or a lot of products today are highly scalable, but what it can mean to an end customer, consumer, right? Is this something that can shift their behavior? Is this something that can enable them to get a better outcomes by using the product? Is something that we look. Doesn't exactly mean impact or anything around that, but I think we believe as a fund that when that outcome is reasonably, we are able to know that outcome, we believe the investment would also appreciate to that extent. At the end of the day today, if Ola and Uber are something that all of us are not using, I think there is no real Ola Uber company here, right? I think that's exactly what we try to assess when we are making that investment.
Thanks, Deepak. I think you've sort of hinted me to go into the next question, and I'll try to cover many questions across the panel. Any of the panelists just feel free to add to what has already been covered. So I'll put this question to Manirat, more on the market opportunity evaluation, right? What Deepak said, that we want to understand how big can this company become? What does it mean to the end consumer? In many cases, investors are looking at opportunities that are market creators by themselves, right? And at that time, an investor feels, it's almost like a much ambitious thought, but it's almost like imagining what the market could be like. In such cases, Manirat, what do you go through, and what are some of the parameters that you evaluate, which could help the audience, which comes from both startup and an investor background, to get some insights on?
Actually, for the market and valuation is quite depend on the preference of investor. If the type or the industry is fit with the preference of that investor, so normally they will pursue the market is very large and the valuation very high. So first you need to find the right investor who have the preference in your business. Yeah, and second is that for VC, normally they will pursue the market in overall, like in the macro trend first. Like for example, for the health tech, not many business is in like the unicorn or the the health tech sector is still in the early stage. However, most of the investors, they believe that there is an aging society, there is like the COVID trend and blah, blah, blah. So based on all this assumption and in the long-term trend, so the market size will be very high. That's why even many health tech startup, they don't commercialize yet, or even they are in the very early stage, like the POC or prototype stage. But still, many investors, they will give the very high valuation and pursue very large market. Yeah. So
I think just to add to it, many a times when we look at areas like health tech or space tech for that matter, the market size is still to be determined, and it's probably determined by companies that buy from or could acquire the particular solution as well. That is what I did hear you sort of say during your response.
Yes. So like you said that So for the VC, right, or CVC, what our the final goal is for us to exit. So it's very important for the exit goal that there is the potential buyer at the end of our exit. Yeah. So it will eventually link to the market size and the valuation of the company.
Thanks, Manirath. Coming to you, Mangalam, same question. How do you, evaluate how big this company can be when you look at it from an investment standpoint, both in spaces that are slightly defined or spaces that, don't have any precedence of a market?
So, we of course, do our own research and, try to evaluate, what founders bring to the table. And I mean, one of the most important factors, we were discussing about the founders, is, we try to evaluate what their history has been and, how long have they been working together. And I mean, is there something that they have faced a problem and they're trying to, find a solution to it? How deep have they gone in finding a solution, and how deep is the market to actually cater to that solution? And then we try to, understand the market, of course, through our partner network and advisor network as well. Because they are a right judge to, understand the market. Of course, if it's a blue ocean market, there's no stop to it and a lot can be achieved there. But if it's a red ocean, of course, the competition analysis and everything, all the research reports will tell you how the market is big, and we try to, kind of opportunize that.
Sure. Thanks, Mangalam. Coming back to you, Manu, one of the things that we as VCs look at is evaluating the risks that a deal brings, right? One is figuring out the risks. Two is also figuring out ways to mitigate those risks, right? What have been some of the ways in which you've, evaluated risks? And there are many, right, at a stage when you come in. But how do you, put those risks to ease, or put a strategy to mitigate them in the short term or in the long run?
Look, at the stage that we come in, it's on the risk reward sort of quadrant. We're like, absolutely the highest risk, right? So it's you need to be careful. My personal background has been, actually I've spent more years doing late stage private equity, taking companies into IPOs, than I have in doing early stage, and it's tempting to sort of sit down and look for chinks in the armor. And any early stage company that you do back, let me tell you, for the 3 reasons that you will back it, you will see 30 reasons why you should not invest, right? Ultimately, those 3 reasons should give you so much conviction that this can be a significant outlier, or it will not make it, but that's sort of table stakes for seed and early stage investors, right? So we live with a very high failure rate. We live with the cognizance that every sort of idea is and every strategy is sort of befuddled with a lot of risks, a lot of unknowns, because these founders are trying to do something absolutely new on most occasions, right? Having said that, we try and wrap our heads around sort of, are these risks or are these red flags, right? So red flags is something which are absolutely no go for us. Risks which can be mitigated during the course of investment are something we're happy to live with. So what we do effectively is, we're a consumer brands specialized fund. We do a thorough analysis. While we invest in pre-revenue companies, we make it a point that we do not invest in companies which don't have their product ready. And what we do is we have our own sort of consumer panel spread across the country. We have our own retailer network, etc. So these guys, when they see the products, etc., before launch, it acts as a surrogate, for revenues or traction, and sort of mitigates the risk to some extent, right? But I will not kid you saying that this is, as good as having good traction or repeat metrics, which are measurable over a period of time. We tread in the kind of dark gray zones, and very comfortable with doing that. And it's all built into our model. I think the biggest struggle is if you get into looking at early stage investments with a late stage hat, you will never be able to sort of cross the line on doing a deal, right? Sitting down with the founders, bringing in sector expertise, agreeing on what the gaps are, and therefore what are the risks to be addressed, making a 1 year plan, and filling in those gaps either by getting in specialists, getting in experts, getting in more hires, etc., and working towards that is how we typically approach it, rather than saying this is a gap, so we will not invest. Right? Is this an addressable gap? Can we resolve it? Yes, then let's proceed.
Thanks, Manu. Deepak, the same question to you, but also would want to understand if, to mitigate the risk, there is a very well-defined portfolio strategy as well that you'll, across the sectors that you invest in, you've defined, what areas to go into with, what amount of capital. Also, reserve capital for follow-ons. Is that something that you guys do, and what are the other ways of identifying risks and mitigating risks at a sort of a portfolio, at a fund level, as at an investor level as well?
Yeah, so I think one is an ideal world. We have models, etc., which we would be happy if it all plays out. But I think this whole VC and our investments at times are also quite opportunistic, right? While we do want to do certain sectors, certain type of investments, etc., but as and when there is an opportunity out there, we are like, every VC wants to grab that opportunity. And what happens is, specifically, I'm talking about our fund, where see, at the end of the day, if we are backing an entrepreneur, his dream with money, and also partnerships, our internal platforms, our ecosystem network, etc., which are just enablers, right? But the real vision is born with the entrepreneur. What we try and do is we try and test, assuming there is this product, is there a market for it, right? So for example, if we are trying to invest in an AgTech product or a B2B marketplace, we try and actually, while we are trying to assess the risk while we are investing, we also try to reach in the market, talk with farmers, talk with the Reliance Retails of the world or whatever it is. Similarly, if it's a high IP related company, we do try and check out through our ecosystem partners as to what they have seen, what the world is expecting. If it's a B2B, B2BC or whatever kind of a place, we try and talk with starting from small Kirana stores, right? These are things that funds, I'm pretty sure a lot of funds do, just to tell themselves that, yes, these are all the risks that are there and we are aware of these risks, right? Any red flags, regulatory issues, pretty complex regulatory environment are certain things that as a fund we avoid investing in, right? And definitely, so we are not guys who go and put out all the money in the first check, right? We back companies, we lead rounds, we co-invest, we are open with everything, but we do put in first small check, which is typically about $500,000 to $1.5 million kind of investment is what we typically do. And then as the company grows, etc., we redeploy capital back into the company, right? Too much of money on day one is also not good for the company. I mean, they wouldn't really know how to manage it. And the pressures are very different, right? So that's one of the way in which we mitigate risks.
Thanks, Deepak. I'll move to another question, which is quite specific, but more often, VCs come across this problem because of the growth of the startup ecosystem in India and globally. We'll come across many teams that are trying to solve similar problems. And Manirat, I think if you could give us some insights into what are some of the steps that you take if you're evaluating a deal which competes with an existing portfolio at some level or could compete with an existing portfolio in the future versus two deals that are very similar to each other are being evaluated. How is your thought process? What are the parameters that you look at? And if you decide to invest in both these teams, what are some of the best practices that investors could implement to ensure that investors are fair to both the teams?
Okay, so actually we are not the pure VC. We are actually the corporate venture capital that is backed by the telecom in Thailand. So first of all, when we invest, we are not only looking for the financial return, but also we are looking for a strategic return as well. And so when you say that when we compare the two similar company in the same industry. So normally when we talk with them, like the panelists said that apart from the business, we are looking for the chemistry between the founder and our fund as well. Also, we are looking for the potential synergy and the level of commitment that they can provide to our telecom, whether the synergy can be created between the startup and our telecom. Yeah, so this is the key differentiator that we will choose between the same player. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's a good lens that which has a higher strategic fit with the larger CVC mandate. Mangalam, what are your thoughts when you look at teams that could compete with each other in the future or they are already head on with each other? What has been your experience and your thought process there?
See, I mean, I feel every business will have some niche or a moat that they would want to focus on in future. Now, if you'll see, EdTech, a lot of companies are maybe similarly doing what is Byju's has done or other players are doing, and they're still receiving funding and they're still kind of capturing market everywhere. So it's more about the geographies and the market that they're trying to capture. I mean, we do get a lot of companies or ventures who are trying to compete. Maybe a product can be similar, which Google is already working on, but doesn't mean that we stop working on them or kind of demotivate the founders because Google might enter this space or just blow up the market, because that can be actually an acquisition target there. Similarly, I mean, it's more about the geographical market that they're trying to capture, of course, because of the company's history or their strategy in that area. So it's more about the geography that we would try to focus on if they have similar ideas, because I mean, I'm pretty sure not two ventures of the same location would be working on same idea and coming to us. That might be a possibility, but it's more about the market that they would be in and would capture that.
Thanks, Mangalam. That's insightful. I'll now jump to a parameter that is very debated, very hot, always, and a lot of negotiation goes around this parameter, which is the valuations. We've seen some interesting valuations, up rounds, unicorn rounds this year. This has been the year of the unicorns for India. I'll pose this question to all of you, right? I'm sure our attendees want to hear as many insights on valuations, right? How critical is this component when you look at investing? How much of it is, when you go to the table, what is the level of negotiation that is possible for founders, or as investors, what is the degree of negotiation that you do? And what are some of the determining factors that go into creating that valuation in your head? Maybe Mangalam, we could start off with you, and then we'll go to the other panel members as well.
Sure. So we as a fund have a kind of defined pipeline management system where everything from risk to valuation is kind of taken care of, and there's a host system which is called as valuation matrix to come up to a value. All the parameters, a lot of inputs of different models have been put up into place. We try to kind of find a value through that. We share the whole process with the founders, and we try to negotiate not on the final value, but try to understand their thinking on why do you think the system that we have put in place or the model that we have put in place according to the cash flow numbers or our qualitative assessment. We try to negotiate on those points rather than on the final valuation. If they feel any input is wrong to the model, we try to negotiate there instead of the last valuation that comes in, because that kind of gives the clarity, because we have been working on that valuation matrix and would want to follow that as a process. So it's more on the inputs that we try to kind of negotiate with them. And of course, I mean, if nothing comes up, then of course the CCPS or the OCPS rounds are there to kind of take a discount in the next round. But it's more on the inputs that we try to work on with them and try to make them understand what our philosophy is in trying to find out the valuation.
Sure. Thanks, Mangalam. Deepak, same question to you. What are some of the things that you use as guidelines for valuation comfort, as well as the degree to which you could move north or south in a particular range?
Yeah, so first, there is no defined rule book that we internally have or we are able to follow, to be very honest. So there are 2-3 key objectives that we as a fund look, and I'm pretty sure I think it's quite common thing, is the fact, first, as a fund, there has to be a certain target holding that we should be getting to make this investment an optimum one, or at least a near optimum one. Because as the company goes on to raise fundings, I mean, everybody in the cap table gets diluted, right? At the end of the day, we wouldn't want to be sitting on an not so optimal investment, right? That is one thing as a fund we look. And given the stage where we come in, a very early stage, obviously the ask is a bit on the higher side for the risk that we are willing to take as a fund. The next thing is also the fact we are quite conscious about the fact that the entrepreneurs should not get diluted significantly in their early stages. At the end of the day, the entrepreneurs driving the company, they need to be motivated. There has to be something for them to be actually working post a Series B or Series C kind of a round, right? We are quite conscious about it. And at the time of entering, we actually try and model around this as to see how that can ensure at the time of a Series B or a Series C, there is still reasonably significant stake for our entrepreneurs to be running the show for the company. The third, coming to an actual number on the table, I think it's quite driven. There is a market numbers that has been comparable transaction that happens, ask from a founder. Typically, given that these are all very early stage, we broadly have a number, because there's no sales, no multiples on sales, EBITDA, profit, nothing of that sort, no cash flows. Most of these things are actually not there, to be very honest, right? So it's mostly around what market has seen transactions in our comparable segments, what we as a fund have seen, our competitors have seen. That is what drives this. Of course, and if there are two funds, I mean, we lead the investment with somebody, etc. It's a bit more collaborative exercise that happens as to how we agree on a fine valuation number. But in principle, three things. These are the three things that we consider when we are looking at valuations as a fund.
Deepak, a little bit of a follow on there, just for the investors who are attending as well. Sometimes, and especially this year, if you look at multiples in certain sectors, they've sort of jumped up significantly as well, right? And the market is claiming higher multiples for certain specific sectors, which is where, let's say, guys who are in their early stage of investing as angels or very early stage funds may find deals expensive as such, right? And we come across this right? It can be some sector which is flavor of the season today, tomorrow it will be another. How do you what is your advice there to investors as to how to read the market and try to still find a good deal that is investment worthy, or avoid investing if it is too expensive and it is counterproductive for the entrepreneurs, as you mentioned, to give away too much early on as well.
So I think while we also end up seeing a lot of transactions, right? I mean, and there is many that get skipped just because for the reason that the starting on the target holding that we want is not available, or the valuation is super expensive, etc. I think there has to be a moderation. As a fund, we feel that we have to invest in very good companies, and that can be either at the right price, or it can be at an expensive valuation, which is a function of how market is working, right? It's not that we are the only fund who is going and investing there. And typically for angels and other individual investors, etc., they may lose opportunities on some of such transactions. But I think not one single person determines the market here, right? So you just have to play the game, and you have to be part of it. To what extent is a moderation? Is it something that the fund, like how we see, okay, if this is probably too risky and we are also still paying an expensive valuation, maybe we will not put in the full money. We would possibly want to put in half the money, see after 2 years, when we believe markets can be a little reasonably okay, how things are going, etc. So I think the same would apply to everybody depending on their risk appetite. I mean, as a fund, obviously it would be a little more compared to an angel investor who is trying to invest, right? And to an entrepreneur, I think they need to be cautious. They shouldn't get carried away. While definitely it's a good opportunity for entrepreneurs to raise funds, especially when there is a FOMO, but they need to understand it's not one day game. There is a long way there. They have to be there to play the game fully. So that means they have to be moderate in their expectations, with whom they are raising the funds, how they will put to use. It's not just FOMO. Okay, today I go in the market, I'll get money. That's not the only driving factor that can be there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, right? I mean, we've heard certain cases of down rounds, which are hard
Absolutely.
for entrepreneurs, right? That is what you're hinting at, which is you raise capital at a good valuation when the market is hot, and when you're raising subsequent rounds, nobody would want to come in because it's way too expensive. The sector has lost its steam a little bit. Maybe there are certain startup shutdowns in that space. So it gets difficult for sectors also. And that's why I think founders should be, as you mentioned, very cognitive of keeping a very sustainable way of raising capital and keeping that valuation in check for themselves as well. Manu, I think a very interesting question for you, because you're typically very early in the game in terms of valuations, and with no proof, no revenues in many cases. And maybe certain niche categories also that you've invested in the past, where there are no market leaders or guidance startups. Maybe in India you'll find a few globally. Yes, how do you go about valuations there?
No, I think look, venture capital is all about ascribing value to the future and not so much so to the present or its past, right? So we're naturally looking at what is the growth potential, what's is there a niche or white space in the market which this specific brand or product is going to be targeting, or is there a better way to sell a product to a consumer? And I alluded to it in a previous question, that it's an imperfect world for us. We don't work with perfect data, right? We don't have the benefit of hindsight because we have no no traction at all, and therefore we work with surrogates. So we like to believe that given that we focus only on one specific area of investing, which is digital first consumer brands, and you keep doing that again and again and again, and I've been doing that now for 8 years, so you tend to get slightly better at it over time, right? And as you get better at it, you're able to sort of get an assessment of whether this is something which is probably going to work at this price point in this market, and there's going to be appetite based on either a disruption of an existing category or creation of a new category. We do use surrogates, like I said, we have our own consumer panel, we have our own distributor and retailer network. All of these feed in and give us valuable inputs. We lean on our sort of advisors who are specialists from the consumer industry, right? We also lean in on heavily on our LPs. Most of my LPs are super successful people from the consumer brands industry, right? So the CEOs of the top sort of consumer companies. So they're able to help us think through and judge a lot of it. The way we value these businesses, and I think Deepak also mentioned, is we initially cut a small check, and that small check honestly is also an evaluation check for most of us, where we see the first 9 to 12 months with that money, and then we take a larger view on evaluating whether this is something we want to go deeper into. Right. Once we get a sense that this company is taking off or hitting escape velocity, then you double down with more capital, with more conviction, and that is how portfolio returns get generated at a fund level. Right. And if a company is going sideways, then you try and find them a buyer, or you try and sort of reduce your exposure both in terms of time, effort, and capital. That's the simple strategy, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I agree. It's not easy to, put a number. Typically, most VCs try to put a model together to get a range, which is their comfort range, and negotiations typically would happen in that range, if any. And yeah, there have been enough people from the ecosystem who let deals go if it's not within their comfort or a little too away from their mandate. So, thanks. Maniraj, same question to you. I think as a corporate venture capital arm, you're almost building a road to, or a portfolio of companies that can work strategically with the corporate, as well as a little bit of a pipeline for acquisitions in the future. So it's a little bit of what valuation do you give them today versus how big can they become from the partnership? How many, what's the degree of synergy that can be drawn? And eventually, if they become a good acquisition target, that's a scenario that you may also sort of build in. How do you go about that process, internally?
Actually, there are some key points that other panelists already pinpoint. Is that actually we have saw many cases in the market that they are looking for very high valuation, and eventually it costs the down in the next round because they cannot raise in the higher valuation because they cannot achieve the level of traction that they already commit in the previous round. So actually, there are many use cases in the market, and we have so many. So many new startup they actually quite aware of this problem. So normally when we talk to the startup, nowadays they are quite doing their homework before they talking to the investor. So this quite good sign in the market. And also you mentioned about the synergy. Yeah. So unlike the normal VC, so when we will partner with the startup, or we will create the potential synergy with startup, yes, so that will be the high or another valuation that we will give to the startup. Yeah, so if the startup can work or can partner with our telecom, definitely we will perceive this as very good value. And because of the potential synergy, this might be the potential exit for our investment as well. Yeah. So synergy is another valuation, another value for corporate venture capital.
Superb. I'll take one more question, and then we'll see if we have any questions from the attendees. Typically, when we're talking about a relationship between an entrepreneur and a VC, there are let's say give and takes, of course, which is how involved can you be with the entrepreneur? What is the sort of assistance that we can provide as investors, and also for entrepreneurs to understand what are the areas where investors can really add value. Typically, in your relationship with founders in the past, what are some of the major aspects that you've helped founders cover, and what would you be cognitive of when founders come and request certain request for whatever support as well? Maybe Mangalam, we can start with you on that question.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you'll see, World 5, it says capital and beyond. So
Yeah.
it's not only the capital, that we try to provide to a, venture or the founders. It's also, the beyond part to it, which, we kind of bring in through the advisor or the partner network. And we kind of mention it, of course, in the starting as well. So, I mean, whatever the help they need in terms of mentorship, in terms of the technology part to it, maybe in terms of, getting some, floor to them into the corporate world, to them to get them some POCs and stuff. We try to help them there. And this has been most usually the request to kind of, introduce them to the corporate world with the product they have, to at least start the POCs. And of course, not to get the revenue part to it, but at least get an entry to the POCs that we try to do through the partner network that we have. Of course.
Yeah, I think it's supremely important, at least for B2B companies, if you can open doors to relevant corporate partners. Something I do at the fund as well, fairly actively, as POCs, as customers, or even some of these relationships become long term and are a little bit of an R&D bet sort of a relationship. Every new product, if you have an intimate relationship with a corporate or a partner, you can test it out with them before you go to other corporates and other markets as well. Deepak, how do you? What is your thought process on working closely with a entrepreneur? I mean, we did hear the panel talking about high velocity entrepreneurs request a lot of things, and it's our duty as investors and part owners of the companies to assist them. But what are some of the best practices that you've implemented, and some of the interesting things that you've experienced in the past on this front?
So I think given that we invest early stage, right? I mean, all our entrepreneurs needs everything, to be very honest, right? I have helped entrepreneurs getting a valuation report, to hiring CXO level people, to getting their customers. So as a fund, we literally, for every single company, there is need, right? And the need is literally across the board. So what we have as a fund is, we have an internal platform, a program called Ankur Grow, where we have, over the past our experience with our fund one, etc., we have curated basically a platform, internal platform, where we have tried and put together a lot of activities which we think our founders require. Those could be simple, the entry level engineer hiring, to say a CXO, a product head, from a PR to even simple press releases, to complex PR, like how PR strategy for the company should be there for the next 2-3 years, to literally ESOP structuring, programming, getting their customers, GTM. We also have a venture advisory board. Basically, we have tried and got people of different backgrounds who help our portfolio companies, or they are their sounding board, say on branding, to board, to strategy, to marketing. So we have basically curated a program. This is purely from our experience of our first fund, which currently we are investing from our second fund, and the feedback that we have, the necessities of our startups that we have seen, right? So through this, basically what we do is, we give them a platform, some of the low impact areas which are more regular, repetitive in nature. The founders are very free to just go look into that platform, take somebody whom they have worked with. We also have, say, for example, company A has worked with somebody, it worked well, didn't work well. So those feedbacks are also part of that platform. So, so I mean, our entrepreneurs just do that. I mean, but where there is a little higher impact areas, we get a little deep, and we work with them closely to solve that problem for them.
Thanks, Deepak. Manu, I'm sure you get a lot of requests from your portfolio, and in many cases, as VCs, just to take the ecosystem to the next level, we are able to offer assistance even before we take an investment call, right? What are some of the best practices that you sort of maintain, as well as what is the level to which entrepreneurs can ask assistance from somebody like yourselves?
Yeah, my most frequently dialed numbers on my phone are my founders. more than my wife, right? It's a marriage that you get into. We as Sauce have taken a conscious call to do very few deals so that we're able to give our personal bandwidths. And of course, there different models work for different funds. But I genuinely believe that if you're doing 25, 30 deals in a fund, you're kidding yourself if you're saying you can add value to your founders. You forget the names of the founders if you've got 30 companies in a fund. So we say that we do single digit deals in a fund. Half of them will fail. So at any point in time, we're working with 4 or 5 successful companies where we're putting in all our time and effort. And that's where you go in, you understand these companies so well that you're able to, with blind conviction, take a lot of stake and deliver supersized returns for yourself, for the fund, and it ends up being a win-win outcome for the founder as well. And today the market is so flush with liquidity that if you're going in with a sort of no value add approach, and or going with a completely sector agnostic approach to a founder, it's very tough for a small fund like mine to compete with the likes of a Sequoia or an Axel, who've got a brand name which is global and will always attract the best founders. So our strategy was always very clear: focus on just one thing, just that one sector, and try and build expertise on just that one sector at that one super early stage, and become sort of create a brand for yourself where founders see you as an allied partner who will add value, who's got sector expertise, right? So for them today, founders are so evolved. It is nothing like it was even 3 years ago, right? Founders have a lot of choices, and a mentality and culture within the fund to treat founders as your clients, not your LPs, right? So genuinely, you have to build products, value add structures, ecosystems, etc., to serve your clients, which are your founders. And in that process, you'll be able to generate returns, right? So for us, it's an easy conversation when the D2C founder comes to me and he tells me, boss, I have a problem in building my middle funnel on Instagram, because I know exactly why that's a problem, and I've seen it in 20 other companies, right? So we're able to get them the right expert from the ecosystem to help them specifically with that. So I think as the Indian VC market evolves, we will see a lot more sector focused and stage focused funds evolve. And we've seen that in the US, right? The biggies, A16Z, Sequoia, Benchmark, all of them are taking all the unicorns. But then there is also these small sort of sector niche focused funds which are doing really well in terms of their IRRs, right? So they're some of the top performing funds. So I think VCs are also evolving. Founders are evolving. Founders are expecting more of VCs in terms of value add, and they want to know, boss, how much do you understand of my sector? How much do you understand my problem, right? So before I come to you, and if they figure that you don't understand their business or their problems, they will stop asking. Like they figure out, they're very smart, yeah. They figure out, boss, let's move on and let's try and figure out a solution elsewhere, because these are hustlers. They don't have time to sort of keep, and so if you meet their expectation, they'll keep calling you again and again. If you don't, they move on and find their solutions elsewhere.
So it's important to understand that time is a very scarce resource with founders, and whenever they will find the right sort of partners, they will move, or they'll quickly gain high momentum on that. So theme-based investing, like what you've been doing, is important, and it's able to deliver some specific insights into problems that you've looked at. So investors typically should also focus, even if you're sector agnostic, focus on certain sectors, and be the ability to give that insight to founders and solve their problems very quickly based on past experiences or as partnerships that you may have for the fund is important. Thanks for that, Manu. I think that was insightful too. I'll move on to some of the questions that we're seeing on the chat here. I think Sachin is asking, what is a good example of a startup, or how does a startup that has no revenue can go about raising capital? So Manu, I think that's a question very straight in your sort of alley. When there are no revenues, what are some of the guiding parameters that you look at? I mean, we discussed a few of them during the conversation.
Yeah, I think Deepak mentioned it really well. This is just you have to sort of look at founding team very closely. You have to look at their ability to understand what problem they're trying to solve and how they're going to go about solving it, and sort of sharing their vision, etc. And for us, as investors, we sort of try and look at what is that one impact this startup can create in a white space, and sort of place our bet on that. There is no right metric, however, to value these. And I think, Arjit, you mentioned at some level that we try and operate in a comfort zone of valuation ranges when you come in at your first sort of seed check, right? That comfort zone is sort of now slipping away slowly and slowly with a lot more capital available. But yeah, well, it's part of the game. It's happened in every market. But there is no hard and fast. What we try and do, and one of my other panelists mentioned, is you look at what's the eventual dilution, because dilution is irreversible. You also look at where you think you'll be able to raise the next round, because what you don't want is a down round. You want an upside in the next round. So some of those factors come in, weigh in, and then it's always a function of market. You can't ignore what's going on in the market at some level. Try and be disciplined about it, but certainly cannot ignore it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Arjun. Now, as we are running out of the time, we need to conclude the session. So now I would like to thank everyone out here for such a valuable session. We surely enjoyed it. It was indeed enlightening to have you, Arjun. You indeed did a great job being a moderator. I would like to give a special thanks to Manu, Deepak, Manirat, and Mangalam for being a panelist for our session at the event. Thank you all for making this session remarkable, insightful. Thank you all.
Thanks. It's a pleasure. And on behalf of the entire panel, people who are attending, thanks for your time. All of us are, available on LinkedIn, or you could go to our fund websites, and our emails are typically there. Feel free to reach out to us if you find us relevant, and all of us will be happy to, have a chat with, founders who are trying to, build the next category biggies in the future.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to tell all the attendants that please, our next session is starting at the 11:30. So please, I request you all to join out there. Thank you all.
Thank you. And thanks for organizing a great event.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.